And here's another video from the Ville. I'm Professor Greenawalt, and this is Government 241, or Public Administration. We're at the point now where we are studying public policy analysis. We're going to be looking at program review, and we're going to look at benefit cost analysis. Then we'll be looking at budgeting. But let me give you an example of public policy analysis in terms of one of the largest movements in American public administration, particularly from the 1990s, and that was the issue of privatization. Privatization in the 1990s went across America like a prairie fire, and it all began a little bit before that time with a book by E.S. Savas, S-A-V-A-S, E.S. Savas. And that book was called How to Shrink Government. It's listed on your syllabus, and I still think that is a superb book to review and to read to begin any study of privatization. First of all, what is privatization when we're talking about this in regards to government? Privatization would be situation, and privatization can take several forms, in which one, the government unit, whatever unit we're talking about, decides that that's not something that they should do at all. And they say, we're going to let the private sector do this, or we're not going to do it at all. We've done it in the past, but we're not doing it anymore. It formerly was true that in just about every municipality in the United States in the past, they all collected garbage. But we're at the point now where most municipalities have said, we'll let the private sector do that. We're not going to do that anymore. They can do it more efficiently and more effectively. So why do we want to do that? So one is the government can simply say, we're not going to do that anymore. You can also have privatization by having the government continue to deliver a good or a service, but let the private sector come in and oversee the management and administration of that service. A third way of that we can have privatization is the government continues to take responsibility for that service, but we find that the private sector comes in and they not only oversee the operation and the administration of it, but they actually do it. But it's still a government service. So these are all different forms of privatization that we see. Of course, we've had famous cases of privatization that have been debated in Pennsylvania government in recent years. We had, of course, something that we've talked in class about previously, the whole notion of privatizing the state store system, that should Pennsylvania be responsible for being the agent that sells hard liquor? They are not the agent that sells beer or sells wine. Now we can get, of course, beer, from many, many private beer distributors. We can get wine. Of course, we can buy that in the state stores, or we can get that at many grocery stores, like has been true for many, many other states throughout the Union for many years. The other case of privatization that occurred a few years ago was when Governor Rendell woke up one morning and decided he was going to sell the Pennsylvania Turnpike. You and I have as much right to announce that we're going to sell the Pennsylvania State Museum as the governor did, saying he could sell the Turnpike. He couldn't sell the Turnpike, nor did he have the authority to do so. Only the legislature could approve something of that sort. And so on my television show that occurred after he made the announcement, I made the announcement that the State Museum was for sale as well. And we find that there was a protracted debate on this. The governor wanted to sell the Turnpike, lock, stock, and barrel. He wanted to sell it to a private firm from Spain. And what would happen in that instance? Well, What would happen in that instance is that the Spanish company is in that business to make a profit, and of course, and how would they make a profit here? Here in the United States, which they don't necessarily care about, you find that they're going to what? They're going to increase tolls, and they're going to minimize maintenance. And those are the two ways when you can, where you can, how you can increase your profits. And there were a number of us. I certainly believe in certain cases of privatization, for example, and so does my think tank. But we fought this proposal by the governor tooth and nail, and I'm happy to say that the legislature never approved it, and the governor had to focus on other things that needed to be done in Pennsylvania at the time. Well, let's talk about a case of privatization. One of the most famous cases of privatization that we have in the United States, and one, it was privatizing a service that most people believe can't be privatized. I remember I was participating in a mayoral debate for the Lancaster County League of Women Voters, and this was happening, I believe, at the Brunswick Hotel in downtown Lancaster. And there were a number of us that were asking questions of the candidates, and I asked the candidates whether or not it would be possible to privatize, if they've ever looked into the possibility of privatizing city fire service. And they all smirked and giggled, and they said, "Oh, absolutely not, it's not possible to do that." Afterwards, I tarried long enough to talk with them and told them about what had happened over the years in Scottsdale, Arizona, and that they had not known about. And I think a few left there with perhaps a few question marks and maybe a willingness to learn a little bit more, although suffice it to say that the Lancaster County, Lancaster City fire departments have certainly not been privatized up to this point. Well, what we want to do when we're talking about privatization is where and when is it appropriate to privatize services involving public goods? Remember our definition of public goods. Can the private sector supply a public good? Well, in the case of firefighting, we find that the citizens of Scottsdale, Arizona were not happy about their fire service, about their professional fire service. They were not happy with the costs involved with it or the results. And we find that a company was formed called Rural Metro Fire. Rural Metro Fire in Scottsdale, Arizona. Find what are the highest costs of a fire company? Well, the highest costs for a fire company are the cost for personnel, of course. And we find that the folks who wanted to offer private fire service to Scottsdale looked at all the areas where costs were involved with the fire service, and they figured out ways to try to minimize those costs. And you find that even after the fire service was privatized in Scottsdale, what's the incentive to keep those costs low? The incentives to keep the costs low, even after something is privatized, is the fact that there should be bidding every so many years. There should be competition or potential competition for the contract to provide fire service to the city. Well, what were the ways that, in this case, what were the ways which Rural Metro Fire minimized costs? You find that they engaged in a whole host of firefighting innovations. The greatest costs were personnel. So what this company did is they went to all the units of city and county government, and they asked the management and acquired their permission to solicit their employees. They made a presentation to all the employees saying, we want you to be something called wranglers. We want you to be semi-professional firefighters. If you decide to be a wrangler, your bosses have agreed to give you the time off. You'll leave for several weeks. You'll be trained as a firefighter. And then when you return and join the force, what would happen is they were each given a beeper, and they were given a week of each month. And what would happen, they would be on duty for a week each month. And if their beeper went off that week, they were allowed to leave work immediately, and the beeper told them where they should drive to, where they should report. They'd immediately, the fire truck would be there. They would don their firefighting apparel and they would join the fight. You find that you have considerably lower personnel costs when you have just you're not paying the full force to sit in the fire company buildings waiting for fires to occur. We're paying them their salaries and their benefits. With the wranglers, they simply paid them a small stipend for being on duty on a week, and then if they actually responded to a fire, they were paid extra in those instances. So that's how we go about minimizing personnel costs. Now, every firehouse did have two people there, a driver and a dispatcher. So those were if they received the report of a fire, the driver would have to don his gear and take the truck there, and the wranglers who were on duty at the time would be called, and they knew they had to immediately get to the fire and help put it out. So that was the first way that the company was able to save money. The second way that they were able to have money, save money, is that staffing patterns. You find that most fire companies have the largest amount of staff that they would need for the largest fire of the year on duty all the time throughout the year. And what happened in Scottsdale, Arizona was Rural Metro Fire simply did an analysis. When were the worst fires? When would they need the greatest number of staff? And what they did is they found, of course, the worst fires for them were in the summer, so they wanted to have more firefighters available in the summer than they did in other parts of the year. So they did that analysis on when the worst blazes were and when they would need the largest number of people. And then they went ahead and they looked at the equipment. First of all, find that most fires are small fires. They're household grease fires, kitchen grease fires. And what has been done in the past is when there's report of any fire, you roll out all these massive trucks and send them to a neighborhood when there's just a small grease fire in the kitchen. What they did was they developed something called an attack truck. An attack truck is nothing more than a pickup truck equipped with some of the most basic firefighting equipment. And for small kitchen fires, for example, they would simply use an attack truck, and you didn't have all the costs of rolling out the largest equipment and sending that to that small fire. Something else they did to protect the lives of their firefighters was they used something called a snail. A snail was like something you'd find at Radio Shack in the past. A snail is a robot, and this robot was fire resistant, and the robot could go into the worst flames, and it would be able to tell the firefighters what the temperatures were, and they had a camera on to show you what the fire looked like in that particular room. The snail would also carry a fire hose in and could begin to douse the flames and try to bring the fire slightly under control before firefighters went into that room. So the snail helped make firefighting safer for the wranglers. Number 3, in order to get more water on the fire in a quicker fashion. What was true in the past is that firefighting companies would use 2-inch hoses. What they did was they expanded their diameter of their fire hoses to 4 inches so they could get twice as much water on the flames in the same amount of time. Now, obviously, the water pressure on those hoses is tremendous and they're hard to handle. So the wranglers all had to have extensive training using these fire hoses that had much greater water pressures than normal. What was also true about the fire hoses is that at a fire scene, you'll find that in the past, many of the fire hoses had male-female coupling. And sometimes you were in a situation where you desperately needed to put two hoses together and it was a male-male or a female-female coupling and it didn't work. So they developed a coupling that would fit together all the time, I don't know, a unigender, if you will, a coupling. Both ends of the hose could fit with any end of any other hose. So that saved time and would reduce the number of situations where there was a pause in getting water on the flames. The other thing they did, there were two other things that bear mentioning. We find that they bought lots of old fire trucks from around the country. They'd bring the fire trucks to Scottsdale, they would store them, and then when a fire truck needed a new part, rather than having to spend the money to buy an expensive new part, they could simply cannibalize the equipment that they had and take it off of an older truck and get to use it on their new truck. Lastly, they didn't have something on their trucks that saved them a good bit of money. We find that this costs a good bit of money and it doesn't help us at all in putting out fires. Can you imagine what it is? The only good that this serves is when the fire company is competing against other fire companies during a fireman's parade at some community celebration. It is, of course, chrome. Fire trucks are famous for all the chrome that they have. A very expensive item, but it doesn't help put out fires. So all the fire trucks that were used and ordered by Rural Fire Metro were devoid of chrome. Now, how do we know if this change in fire protection was effective or not? We can look at, for example, the cost of fire protection. The cost of fire protection nationally at the time that Scottsdale did this was $24.39 per capita. So most of the rest of the country, Lancaster, for example, was paying $24.39 per person. Every person in Lancaster paid that, contributed that to the city for their fire protection. Well, in Scottsdale, Arizona, once they privatized, the cost of their fire protection was $5.70. So we go from $24.39 to $5.70 per capita. How about the quality of the service that the private company was offering? Well, the quality of the service would be found in their insurance rating. And we found that after a period of time with the new fire company in effect, that the insurance rating actually improved for Scottsdale. So the cost was good, the quality was good. We can also look at the average fire loss per year. Across the nation, the average fire loss per year was $12 per capita. $12 was being lost by every person per year in every city. We find in Scottsdale, the loss per capita was nothing more than $4.44 per person. So again, across the nation, the average fire loss per year was $12 per capita. In Scottsdale, it was $4.44 per capita. Well, if we are to wrap up this section, we want to know that if efficiency is the primary concern, then the private sector should supply public goods. In some instances, Um, it may not be worthwhile, however, to pursue this course of action. In some instances, you may want to involve yourself in income redistribution. For example, state government in Pennsylvania could clean their buildings in Harrisburg much more cheaply with a private service. They maintain a Department of General Services to continue to clean their buildings, because that way you can offer a wide variety of people with lower skill sets good employment with good benefits, and it begins to allow some income redistribution in some of the cities perhaps where it's needed the most. Secondly, if you want to ensure the continuing provision of an essential service, for example, fire service, with the exception of Scottsdale, Arizona. By the way, I forgot to mention that Rural Fire Metro started out providing the fire service just to Scottsdale, Arizona. After a decade, it provided service to 2/3 of the state of Arizona. That's how good a job they did. But normally, fire service, security services, garbage companies, garbage collection companies, these may be privatized, but you can't create them overnight. So we found a case where, New Zealand decided to privatize their rail service. And all of a sudden, people were finding that it was possible to buy these wonderful fences for their yards, their backyards, and they were the sides of rolling stock. You could buy the side of an old railroad car and it would say New Zealand Rail, and put that in your backyard. It looks pretty cool. And they were tearing up the track in order to sell for scrap. So the private company was essentially taking all the rail assets and they were selling them. And New Zealand had to think, we as a country, do we want to have rail service for the future? And they decided that yes, in the future they wanted to have the option of rail service in addition to their network of roads and their collection of airports. So indeed, they rebought the rail system from the private company, and they decided they would find other ways to make it more efficient. But they took back the rail system from that private company and saved its existence. So these are all things to consider. The same sort of thing happened in Atlanta when Atlanta decided to privatize its water system. Again, what happened in these instances, that kind of privatization could have succeeded, but the Atlanta authorities did not monitor the situation. Sometimes you can privatize a service, but you have to continue to monitor that it's being provided well for all citizens. If it's not, you have to look to make a change or return to the government provision. So that wraps up my comments about privatization. I'll be happy to answer any questions you have. Shoot them to me on email or give me a call. I'm happy to talk with each and every one of you. Okay, we'll be back next with a discussion of program review and policy analysis.
Done.
We're done for the night.